Hi y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to the second installment of a video that I started to do that got pretty well received, so I decided, well, you know what, I've got enough products, let's do a number 2. That sounded a lot better in my head before it came out of my mouth. But today we are going to be talking about even more products in my collection that I wouldn't purchase today. This isn't a products I regret buying or products that suck. The majority of these products are good. I've gotten use out of them, but with my makeup style and my makeup journey and my progression and where I am at now, these are just items that I have come to realize are things that if I lost them or if they broke or whatever, they aren't anything that I would go out and repurchase. This has very much to do with makeup preference, what I like in my makeup, how I do my makeup. So obviously, if I talk about a product that you absolutely love, that is fantastic. As I always say, you keep doing you, boo-boo. But this has just been a really great way for me to really psychoanalyze what's in my collection, and with the makeup rotation and doing declutters and everything like that, it's good to really step back and assess kind of like my spending habits, how I've gotten better, and what I really do now look for in makeup. And for me to realize that opinions change, you know, it's something not to be ashamed of and not to be whatever. Sorry if I look like I'm sweating profusely, it's because I am. But tastes and interests and all that change, so we're just gonna go in and talk about these things. If you have not seen the first installment, I will leave that down below, as well as any related reviews or anything like that to products that I talk about. Okay, we're gonna start off with something that I'm honestly surprised didn't make it into the first round. I hadn't even jotted it down in my little list, because when I have video ideas that need like multiple products, I'll usually write it all out, because I like to be all kinds of prepared and stuff like that. But I didn't even write this down in my list here. But the Jeffree Star original Skin Frosts. Now, y'all know I have a huge thing going on for his Supreme Frosts. I would love to get a hold of any, if not all, of his new fancy, like, Extreme Frosts, because those look all kinds of bomb diggity. But these, you know, this one here is in Ice Cold. I do like this one. I consider this one to be one of the better formulated ones. Then here I've got Peach Goddess, which is, again, another one of the better ones. But it isn't so much that these are a bad product. It's more, you know, as much as I love highlighter, what I love more is having a very streamlined makeup collection organization. I'm very anal and I like things to be in my collection just so. And these are not, they don't like, no. They are a pain to store because they are huge. So you have that. And secondly, I wouldn't purchase these now because while these are, you know, they're blinding, they're cha-cha-cha-cha, they're all that, but they're also a hideously thick formula. You know, I have come to learn that as much as I love highlighter, I love blinding highlighter, I love all things kind of going in that, but I also like a highlighter that looks like it's melted into my skin, that it is beaming off of my natural complexion. And so when it comes to the Jeffree Star original Skin Frosts, they lend themselves to more of kind of like a streak of metal across your face, which is occasionally something that I do go for, but for the majority of my highlighter purposes, I want something a bit thinner but more like Ofra, Ciate London, the collab highlighters, even the Jeffree Star, the Supreme Frost, because yeah, they got all kinds of glitter and shimmer and shine, but they're so smooth on the skin. Whereas the original Frosts are just, like I said, you gotta work a lot more to get them all in there. They can sometimes emphasize texture and all of that. So for me, and what I know that I love in a highlighter, and the fact that the storage headache, I know That is such a, like, I know there's so many people who are probably like, well, that's a really stupid reason, but it's my mental, it's my whatever, it's my thinking, it's my personal psyche that I know that because something is, that's why I didn't buy the Marc Jacobs ones, because they're huge, they're bulky, they're clunky. I already kind of half regret buying that Too Faced Glover highlighter, because it's a big old chunky, big head of a dog. But that, the packaging, as well as the formulation just lends itself to being something that I wouldn't purchase today. Now we're gonna go into something that is an overarching theme, something that's just something that I wouldn't buy today because I have learned with my makeup and how I do my makeup, what I like, what I do. This just isn't something, I would buy like one, and I have since decluttered a whole bunch of these because at one time I was like, yes, I need all of these because I need all of the options, all of the varieties from every brand, and that is contour palettes. Now, like I said, in the beginning, I had Anastasia, I had the NYX, I had the Lorac, I had one from Urban Decay, I had the Kat Von D one, I got this Too Faced one, which has since been repackaged, and your girl was tempted. It was made to look like all like chocolateness, and I was like, I want that. But I was able to remind myself that the fact that I have a myriad of these and the fact that I basically don't use them. I honestly think one of the last times that I ever actually contoured with like an actual contour color was when I reviewed the Tarte Face Clay Play Face Shaping Palette Volume 1, and that was a long time ago. When I do my vampire look, I do contour with the Anastasia Beverly Hills Gradient Blush Palette. But when it comes to normal, traditional, chiseled goddess contouring, I just don't do it. And I don't know if that has to do with like it not being necessarily conducive to a lot of the looks that I do, but I have in my collection still. I got this one, I kept the Lorac one, I kept the ABH one, and I have the Kat Von D one, which is, I mean, that's more than one person needs anyway. But nowadays, knowing, this is one thing that I love about doing these videos, is you learn so much. You start to pull away from the fanaticism that like the industry tries to brainwash you into thinking. And you know, so you're kind of like, well, I do need every different contour kit from every bit. No, I don't. I need one for one face. And so even when I was buying these, I was under that impression of just being like, well, I gotta have them all. I gotta have it from every brand. And now if I were to buy one, I would do my research. I would figure out what would work best for me, and I would purchase one. And then when I ran out of that, we'd go get another one rather than going on in and being all crazy and buying all of them. Because I had a myriad of contour products, not just this, you know, contour duos and whatevers and things that I just don't use, but I keep in my collection because I'm like, you know, I do love this shade. I have used these. What I don't use them now, I never use, because I use a loose setting shade. I never do that. And like I said, I don't know if it's because it's just not necessarily the most conducive with my aesthetic, or if I'm just lazy and typically when I contour I look like a nasty muddy mess. But nowadays I would not contour, I would not purchase probably any contour palettes, and if I did purchase any, it would be one, not 5. Because I have come to the realization that makeup, believe it or not, because in the beginning, I've said this in I don't know how many videos, but in the beginning I was like, you know, mustn't use too much lest we run out of it. And now I've learned that you can use a lot of things as much as you want and you ain't ever gonna run out of it anyway. Makeup lasts a lot longer than I feel like a lot of the industry wants you to believe. So I could get one contour kit and have it be good and viable for years. The next thing is not necessarily an overarching theme so much as is sort of an OG product. I did talk about, I believe, the Lorac Pro Palettes in my first one, and some other eyeshadow palettes that really jumped out at me for being something that I definitely, you know, if I were to go into the store and have an unlimited budget and I would have to start all over again, or even just going in, there are a plethora of palettes that I wouldn't purchase today. Some of which being the original Urban Decay Naked palettes. Now this one here, this is the first one. She has been since discontinued, and as such, I should probably let her go because I can't tell you how old this girl is. I did use Naked and Buck a fair amount. I used Half Baked, I used Sidecar, Sin, Virgin. Didn't really delve into these over here. Then there's the second one, which was probably my least favorite. It's very cool tone. I mean, the color that's based on this, you know, the original one was like browns, the third ones was like rosy tones, and this one was literally taupe. And y'all know how I feel about taupe, ecru, eggshell, off-white, sand. It doesn't really get me going in a lot of the ways. And so thinking about the color selection, I mean, I bought these, the Too Faced chocolate bars, the Lorac palettes, basically all of those. I even bought the Smashbox like exposure, full exposure palettes. Partly because they were what was available on the market, but also partly because they were what were touted as being really super popular. And in the beginning, definitely when I hadn't really fully discovered and developed my makeup aesthetic, I was honestly just going out and buying whatever people were saying is good. So you have the neutrality of it all, which when I do neutrals, y'all know I've got ones from ColourPop. I like the Melt Cosmetics Gemini palette, which is neutral. I like their Rust palette. You know, the neutrals that I like skew a bit more alternative than this. Also coupled with the fact that the original 1 through 3 Urban Decay Naked palettes are palettes that I feel just haven't aged well in the market, as well as that matte to shimmer ratio, because these I feel skew very early 2000s where you're looking for just kind of like a shimmer on the lid, a little something in the crease, and you're good to go. Whereas nowadays we're looking for something a bit more buildable, a bit more versatile, and a bit less all-encompassing shimmery. So while at one point I feel like I did rave about these, probably just because I didn't know any better, and I have seen some very talented people come up with some really beautiful looks for these, but these things are just really not my vibe. I mean, the majority of this stuff I need to pull in a makeup rotation to decide whether I really need to have this in my collection, because like I've said a million times, if I have it and I don't use it, what's the point? Then if we're going to talk about a what's the point palette, I have this, I reviewed it, I occasionally use it. I know a lot of people absolutely love this palette, but the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette, which I feel compared to like the Urban Decay, this is a neutral palette that I would go and lean towards way more than them, because you've got a better matte to shimmer ratio, though not hugely. It gives you more gradation. You've got this beautiful black here that's a nice matte, this nice gray. I love this bloom shade. The shimmers are really beautiful. From a quality standpoint, this is a fantastic ABH palette that I honestly think, I'm pretty sure this was limited edition. I think if Anastasia made this permanent, people would be totally fine, because it is a much more cohesive neutral based palette than a lot of other things that they have that are permanent. But second verse is same as the first. I am not a very neutral person. And when I do neutrals, I'm not a very earthy, bronzy person, which is kind of what this palette lends itself to. When it comes to neutral tones for me, I'm much more mustard, mauve, you know, like neutrals that basically aren't neutrals. So while this is really pretty, and I do love this rose quartz shimmer, absolutely beautiful. And the quality of this is good, which is why I'm so torn about like still having it in my collection. I know for a fact this isn't something that I would purchase nowadays for my personal use. I do purchase basically everything that Anastasia releases because I love reviewing their products. But just for me and my personal whatevers, you buying this to use it and to have in my collection is not something that would happen. I wouldn't go into Sephora or Ulta and be walking around and looking at the palettes and being like, oh yeah, this is one that I definitely need to have and I will get a ton of use out of. Then if we're going into palettes that I wouldn't buy today, apparently I did not talk about these in my first whatever, but the Lorac Pro Palettes, which for any of y'all who've been with me for an extended period of time know that these were the palettes that I recommended. And still to this day, I love the Lorac matte formula. I mean, this was a palette that I used and abused. I've got huge dips in mauve, sable, espresso, light pink, taupe. Y'all heard it here. I have a huge dent in an eyeshadow named taupe. Cream and white. You know, these mattes up here, the black, these were used and abused. Not so much the shimmers, but this was something that I reached for on a regular basis when I was doing any kind of my, like, you know, gothic or vampiric, that kind of alternative makeup. And then same with the, I believe this is the second one, you know, once again, these cooler neutral shades like buff, light brown, cool gray, nectar. Nectar was great for making your eyes look all kinds of sickly. And so I did get a lot of use out of these, but looking at them, just kind of like all these palettes I'm talking about, it's not because they're bad. It's not because there's something that any of y'all shouldn't get. It's just because now that I have matured and reached the point that I know what I look for and what I use on a regular basis, going in and just la-la-la-la-la-la-ing through Sephora, it's just not something that I would go out of my way to pick up just because looking at the color story on a whole, I mean, if they came out and they did a whole matte version of this, I would be much more inclined to pick it up because these shimmers, while this one, this one, this one, and this one are the type that I would go for, the rest just really aren't for the way that I do my makeup. And so it's just being more practical and knowing what I like that I wouldn't go in and purchase these today. Like I said, not because they're bad, not because they're not something that isn't viable, but because for the way that I do my makeup now. And honestly, the same with this one though. If they came out with these and they were all matte, I would be honestly all over this shiz because as an all matte palette, these are much more viable for how I do my makeup and how I like my makeup to look compared to the matte and the shimmer row going on here because the shimmers just don't get nearly as much use as I've gotten out of the mattes in these palettes. And like I said, the Lorac matte formula is bomb diggity. It's powdery, but it is pigmented and it blends beautifully. I did get the Pro 3. I didn't end up getting the 4. The 3 is much more viable for my makeup tastes now because it's kind of reddy, orangey, brown, that sort of thing. Because I'm not typically a cool toned lover unless I'm going for those more sunken, dead sort of looks, which I don't do nearly as often as something where I'm reaching for red or pinks or purples or greens or blues like y'all see. Something else I wouldn't purchase today for a couple different reasons. Y'all know your girl loves highlighter. Y'all know your girl has a lot of highlighter in her collection. We have reached full capacity and we don't need to have any more. Well, during the era of Kat Von D, when I was still desperately clinging on to the hope that they were going to resurface somehow, they were all like, hey, what's up? We're gonna release these Metal Crush Extreme highlighters, which I have said before are basically the poor man's version, not as well formulated version of the Jeffree Star Supreme Frosts, where they're trying to be a kind of glossy, ethereal sort of situation with like a thin, loose back pigment and then a lot of glitter and shimmer and shine and twinkle, which is a great idea. I love using that kind of thing when I'm doing kind of a more ethereal makeup look, or if I have one highlighter and I want to add just a little bit of extra to it, I love that. But in order to do that, you need to have a good formula. And this formula is okay. It is not something that I would write home about, and it's something that I would have been a lot smarter. I would have been a lot smarter now than I was then, because as y'all know, she released the highlighter palette first, and I was all kinds of oh boy about that. And I wasn't a huge fan of the formula. You know, it wasn't something that absolutely blew me away. I was probably trying to convince myself that it was amazing, but in reality, it just wasn't something that was just like, yes, this is something we haven't seen on the market, which it kind of was, but it wasn't necessarily executed in the best way. And then the other reason I wouldn't have least bought a couple different of these, because the Gold School, the Rose Shock, and the Gamma Ray were the ones in the palette that were then re-promoted in singles. So I would have been smart enough to say, well, you have them in the palette already. You don't need singles. Or I'm sure in my rationale was, well, maybe the formula is different, and if I'm gonna review them, I need to be able to review them all. Which is a mindset that I'm definitely trying to leave in 2019. And these are okay, you know? I mean, they're not awful. They're just kind of not as amazing as I wish they could be. You know, they're very glittery, and the glitter doesn't like to stay on your face, which y'all know is a problem that I have with highlighters. You know, I mean, that pink one looks all nice and pretty, but it isn't like this smooth, creamy, like thin layer of pigment with all kinds of whatever, like the Jeffree Star ones on, or even the Ciate glitter ones, because, not the glitter ones, because the Ciate London highlighters are very smooth and buttery and pigmented, and they have just a hint of sparkle that's like not glitter, but they add a little bit of like effervescence to your look. Whereas these ones are very dry, they're very patchy, they just don't look as nice on the skin as a lot of the other ones that I would use for that same effect. So basically, for the majority of whatever, I would just be a lot more discerning about products that I'm getting. I obviously wouldn't buy full ranges. I'm trying to get out of that. I would take into consideration the fact that I bought the palette, was kind of about that. I would just be more mature about my decision making. Then we might as well continue talking about highlighter that I wouldn't purchase today. Now, this is going to be very, very subjective. I mean, all of this is subjective to experience and your own preferences. But this harkens back to the Jeffree Star Skin Frost, where I am incredibly super anal about how my makeup is stored, as well as something a little bit more practical that is something that I'm trying very hard to break myself out of. But for example, are the Wet n Wild. These are the Zodiac highlighting bars. Now, people were very excited about these because they're in the same packaging as that the mermaid one that was... Everybody went crazy for that one because it was kind of like this white gold with like a greeny shift. I love it. I've used it a lot, and I should have kind of known because I had that one. I got the whole mermaid collection. I'm pretty sure I reviewed it. But if y'all know about how I am with my makeup collection, you know that highlighters that are in a really weird shape give me a headache. And I know that seems like such a stupid thing. It really does. I mean, there are so much more things that we should be concerned with than how weird, funky shaped packaging fits into our makeup collection and storage. But for me, it can oftentimes be a deal breaker for a product because I resent it almost for not fitting well into my collection, and then I end up not using it. But for a more significant reason why I wouldn't buy these today, and for something that I'm trying to get myself out of, is these were part of a, I think, limited edition collection, even though you can still get like the glosses and some of the other products, even these highlighters still in some stores. Like you go in and you go to the Wet n Wild section and you see a lot of the Zodiac collection products. I have heard from Lacey from Spooky Lips and Fat Hips that apparently the glosses are bomb diggity. I don't need another gloss in my collection, but that's just some information for y'all to have. But one thing that I'm trying to get out of is buying products and buying collections and getting sucked into the need to purchase things just because they're part of or they are limited edition. Y'all would have seen in my ranting about the falsehood of limited edition that limited edition means absolutely nothing in today's makeup climate. It just doesn't. It isn't a descriptor of quality, of quantity, of uniqueness, or anything like that. It's just something they like to slap on as a marketing technique. And for me, it worked for quite a few years, whereas now I'm trying to pull myself away, not get sucked in to that limited edition lingo and not buying things just because they're limited edition, because I've got that FOMO, that fear of missing out, you know, that desire to be, you know, on trend and be with everybody else who's buying it, and they're all like, well, it's limited edition, so I had to buy it. And I'm like, I want that. I want to be cool. I want to be nifty. When in reality, limited edition, you know, there's just so many things that go into that. You know, is the quality going to be as good? If I really love it, it's going to be something that I'm probably not going to be able to get in the future, you know? And so I'm really starting to get disenchanted with limited edition products and limited edition collections, which are just shilled to us from, you know, just the need to sell. And while I understand businesses are literally made to sell and made to make money, that doesn't mean I have to be a blindfold consumer. I can think to myself and be smart and be like, girl, you hate weird shaped highlighters. This shiz is limited edition. You don't need, there were 2 highlighters that wouldn't work for me skin tone wise. I have since decluttered those, and I'm probably going to be decluttering these. I am just smarter. I am a more well-attuned consumer to what I want and what I need and what I am realistically going to use. So transitioning right into that whole what I am going to realistically use, as well as a product of, oh, the hype, the craziness, I need this, I want it. But the Too Faced Sweet Peach Glow Face Palette. I remember when this came out, and I mean, everybody lost their minds over the Sweet Peach Palette original, and then Too Faced announced that we're going to do a whole collection based on that shiz, and everyone was like, oh boy! And I mean, I went crazy. I had to have this. I wanted the blush. You know, there were just so many things that was just like crazy and hyped up, and I mean, this palette is okay. I need to use it more. Basically, everything I talk about these videos is something I need to use more. But nowadays, especially considering the fact that I have realized that as much as I love and I'm drawn to the concept of face palettes, it's not something that I regularly reach for. I wouldn't purchase this because of that. Especially considering the fact that it's a trio where it's got the bronzer, the blush, and the highlighter. I'd rather have all blush, all highlighter, all bronzer. So it's like, all right, where do I put this thing? And then you have the fact that this palette is okay. It's all right. The blush here is very hard pressed. You know, you gotta work a lot to get that pigment to show up on your face. The highlighter is like kind of nicey nice. This is a pale person bronzer. And so at the time of this thing being released, I was like, oh boy, this thing is gonna be the most amazing thing that's been ever done since sliced bread. When in reality, it's just a peachy, light person friendly face palette. Definitely not worth all the hype. Definitely something that hasn't aged well on the market, and not anything that gives you anything spectacular. It's just kind of a average face palette. And so the fact that I don't do face palettes much anymore, coupled with the kind of colors that it is, coupled with the non-inclusivity, the fact that it was something that's very hyped up that I'm trying to re-teach myself better, trying to not become so sucked into the hype when something gets released and everybody wants it, everyone needs to have it, to really think, take a step back and think, is this thing really viable for me, my interests, and what I already own in my collection, rather than just blindly going on and buying everything that everybody says is amazing. Alright, there we have episode number 2 of makeup in my collection that I would not purchase today. Like I say, obviously this is very subjective. This is my experience, my personal preferences, and all that. Would love to hear your thoughts on the products that I talked about, as well as products in your collection that you've purchased for one reason or another that today you would be like, yeah, no, I wouldn't rush out and buy that again for whatever reason. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!